They physically dragged me out of my grandfather's funeral while I was still crying over his casket, calling me worthless trash who didn't belong there. 3 days later, a lawyer showed up at my apartment with documents that made my relatives' faces go white. My grandfather had left me his entire $6.3 million estate, every single penny. But what those documents revealed about why he chose me over his own children would tear apart everything my family thought they knew about the man they buried. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The Baltimore rain hammered against the funeral home windows that November afternoon, but nothing outside could match the cold I felt inside that room. I stood alone in the back corner of Grayson & Sons funeral home, watching relatives I hadn't seen in 8 years mill around my grandfather's casket like they owned the place, which I suppose they thought they did. My name is Hazel Jones, and I was 26 years old when my grandfather, Edmund Price, died at 83. I'd been the only grandchild who visited him regularly during his final 5 years, but you wouldn't know it from the way my family treated me that day. "What the hell is she doing here?" My Uncle Trevor's voice cut through the organ music like a knife. He was my father's younger brother, a real estate developer who wore his wealth like a costume. His eyes locked onto me with pure disgust. I'd arrived 30 minutes early, specifically to avoid this kind of scene. My grandfather had called me 2 weeks before he died, his voice weak but clear over the phone. "Hazel, honey, when my time comes, promise me you'll be there. Don't let them scare you away." I'd promised. So here I was, in a simple black dress I'd bought at Target 3 years ago, standing among relatives in designer suits who looked at me like I was something they'd scraped off their shoes. My Aunt Diane approached next, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a countdown timer. She was my father's sister, married to an orthopedic surgeon, and she'd perfected the art of looking down her nose at people despite being 5'3". "Hazel, I think it's best if you leave," she said quietly, but her voice carried that particular upper-class tone that made suggestions sound like commands. "This is a family event." "I am family," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Edmund was my grandfather." "Was he, though?" My cousin Brandon had materialized beside his mother. At 32, he'd inherited his father's height and his mother's cruelty. "You haven't been part of this family since your dad died. Grandpa was just humoring you with those visits." That stung more than I wanted to admit. My father, Richard Price, had died 8 years ago in a construction accident. He'd been the black sheep of the Price family, the one who became a union carpenter instead of going into law or business like his siblings. When he married my mother, a waitress from West Virginia, the family had barely acknowledged the wedding. After Dad died, the family cut us off completely. My mother moved back to Charleston to be near her own family, but I'd stayed in Baltimore, working as a veterinary technician and living in a cramped studio apartment in Fells Point. The only Price family member who kept in touch was Grandpa Edmund. "I'm not leaving," I said, moving past Brandon toward the casket. I needed to see my grandfather one last time, to say goodbye to the only person in this family who'd ever treated me like I mattered. I made it about 5 steps before Trevor grabbed my arm. His fingers dug into my bicep hard enough to leave marks. "Listen to me very carefully," he hissed, leaning close enough that I could smell the scotch on his breath. "You were never really part of this family. Your father was a disappointment, and you're just a reminder of his failures. Whatever little relationship you think you had with Dad was pity, nothing more. Now get out before we have you removed." I yanked my arm free, my heart pounding. Other relatives had stopped their quiet conversations to watch the scene unfold. I recognized my grandmother Margaret sitting in the front row, Grandpa's widow of 58 years. She stared straight ahead, her face expressionless, refusing to acknowledge what was happening. "Grandpa invited me," I said, louder now. "He called me 2 weeks ago and made me promise to be here." "He was dying and confused," Aunt Diane interjected. "He didn't know what he was saying toward the end. The medications, you understand." That was a lie. Grandpa Edmund had been sharp as a tack until the very end. We'd talked about everything during that last call: his childhood in Pittsburgh, his years building Price & Associates law firm from nothing, his regrets about how the family had turned out. He'd been lucid, deliberate, and when he'd asked me to promise to attend his funeral, there'd been something in his voice I couldn't quite identify. Urgency, maybe, or perhaps determination. "I'm staying," I repeated, turning back toward the casket. That's when Brandon physically stepped in front of me, blocking my path. At 6'2", he towered over my 5'6" frame. No, you're not. The funeral director, a nervous-looking man in his 50s, approached cautiously. Perhaps we could. This woman is trespassing, Trevor announced to the room. She's not welcome here, and she needs to leave immediately. I have every right to be here, I said, my voice shaking now with anger more than fear. Edmund Price was my grandfather, and I loved him. You loved his money, you mean? Brandon shot back. Everyone knows you were sucking up to him these last few years, hoping for a handout. Well, it didn't work. He left everything to Grandma, and when she passes, it all goes to Dad. And Aunt Diane. You get nothing. The certainty in his voice should have intimidated me, but something about it rang false. Why would they be so aggressive about removing me if they were so confident about the inheritance? I never asked Grandpa for money, I said. I visited him because he was alone, because none of you could be bothered to spend time with him unless there was a holiday dinner involved. That hit a nerve. I watched Trevor's face flush red, watched Aunt Diane's jaw tighten, because it was true, and we all knew it. For the last 5 years, as Grandpa Edmund's health declined, I'd been the one driving him to doctor's appointments, helping him grocery shop, sitting with him on Sunday afternoons watching old westerns and listening to his stories. The rest of the family had been too busy, too important, too focused on their own lives to spend time with an aging man who moved slowly and repeated himself sometimes and needed help opening pickle jars. Get her out of here, Trevor said to Brandon. Now! What happened next occurred so fast I barely had time to process it. Brandon grabbed my shoulders, and when I tried to pull away, he literally lifted me off my feet. I was dimly aware of gasping from some of the other guests, of the funeral director protesting weakly, of my own voice saying, "Stop, let go of me," over and over. He carried me through the funeral home like I weighed nothing, my feet kicking uselessly, my hands pushing against his chest. Other relatives stepped aside to let him pass. Nobody intervened. Nobody defended me. The November rain hit my face as he deposited me roughly on the sidewalk outside, my shoes splashing in a puddle. The funeral home doors closed behind me with a decisive click, and I heard the lock turn. I stood there in the rain, shaking with humiliation and rage, water soaking through my dress. Through the windows, I could see the family gathering around Grandpa's casket, resuming their mourning ritual as if nothing had happened. As if I'd never been there at all. I didn't cry, not then. I walked 3 blocks in the rain to where I'd parked my 12-year-old Honda Civic, got inside, and sat in the driver's seat with water dripping from my hair onto my lap. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Ms. Jones, this is Robert Hutchinson from Hutchinson and Lear Legal. I'm the executor of Edmund Price's estate. We need to meet as soon as possible. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., my office. It's urgent. I stared at the message, confused. Why would Grandpa's lawyer want to meet with me? Brandon had been so confident that everything went to Grandma Margaret, then to Trevor and Diane. I texted back. Is this about the funeral? I'm sorry for any disruption. They removed me before. His response came immediately. This has nothing to do with the funeral. This is about your grandfather's will. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Don't be late. And Ms. Jones. Come alone. Don't tell your family about this meeting. I sat in my car as rain drummed on the roof, reading that message over and over, trying to understand what it meant. Why would Edmund's lawyer want to meet with me? Why did I need to come alone? In the funeral home, my family was saying goodbye to a man they'd barely known in his final years. Tomorrow morning, I'd discover that Grandpa Edmund had one final surprise planned for all of us, one that would change everything. Hutchinson and Lear Legal occupied the 7th floor of a glass tower in downtown Baltimore, the kind of building with marble floors and security guards who looked at you like they were calculating your net worth. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night replaying the funeral scene in my head, feeling Brandon's hands on my shoulders, hearing Trevor's voice dripping with contempt. The receptionist, a sharp-eyed woman named Paula, according to her nameplate, seemed to be expecting me. Ms. Jones, Mr. Hutchinson is ready for you. Conference room 2, down the hall to your left. Robert Hutchinson was not what I'd expected. In my mind, I'd pictured someone like my grandfather, elderly, formal, probably wearing suspenders. Instead, the man who stood to greet me was maybe 45, with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of calm demeanor that probably came from delivering bad news professionally for decades. Ms. Jones, thank you for coming. He gestured to a leather chair across from him. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Your grandfather spoke of you often. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the inner harbor. On the polished table between us sat a manila folder that looked surprisingly thin for what I assumed was estate paperwork. "Mr. Hutchinson, I'm confused about why I'm here," I said. "My cousin Brandon made it pretty clear yesterday that everything goes to my grandmother, then to my uncle and aunt." Something flickered across Hutchinson's face, not quite amusement, but close. "Did he now?" He opened the folder, pulled out a document, and slid it across the table to me. "This is your grandfather's last will and testament, executed 6 months ago. I'd like you to read page 3, section 4. My hands trembled slightly as I flipped to the page. "A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off." The legal language was dense, but certain phrases jumped out at me like they were written in neon. Sole beneficiary, entire estate, residential properties, investment portfolio, liquid assets totaling. I read the number 3 times before my brain would accept it was real. $6,300,000. "This can't be right," I whispered. "There must be a mistake." "There's no mistake," Hutchinson said gently. "Edmund Price left his entire estate to you, Hazel Jones, his granddaughter. Every asset, every property, every investment account. Your grandmother Margaret receives the house they shared in Roland Park, fully paid, for as long as she lives, plus a monthly allowance of $8,000 from the estate. Your Uncle Trevor and Aunt Diane receive nothing. Your cousin Brandon receives nothing. Everything else comes to you." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the table. "But why? I don't understand. They're his children. Brandon is his grandson, too." "Your grandfather was very specific about his reasoning," Hutchinson interrupted. He pulled out another document, this one handwritten on yellow legal paper. "He left you a letter. He asked me to give it to you after I'd explained the basic terms of the will." The letter was written in Grandpa Edmund's careful, slightly shaky handwriting. My eyes blurred with tears as I started reading. "My dearest Hazel, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and Robert has just told you about the inheritance. I imagine you're shocked, probably confused, maybe even angry at me for putting this burden on you. I need you to understand why I made this decision. For 55 years, I built Price & Associates from nothing. I worked 70-hour weeks, missed my children's school plays and baseball games, sacrificed my health and my marriage in a lot of ways, all because I believed I was building something for my family, a legacy, security. But somewhere along the way, my children learned the wrong lessons. They saw the money and the success, but they didn't see the values that were supposed to come with it: hard work, integrity, kindness to people regardless of their bank balance. Trevor became a man who measures people's worth in dollars. When your father Richard chose a different path, became a carpenter, married your mother Sarah, Trevor treated him like he'd committed a crime. Diane was no better. They were embarrassed by their own brother because he worked with his hands and married for love instead of status. When Richard died, when your family needed support most, my children turned their backs. They convinced Margaret to cut you and your mother off completely. They told me you were opportunists who would try to take advantage of Richard's death to get money from the family. I was weak, Hazel. I didn't fight them hard enough. That's one of my greatest regrets. But 5 years ago, you showed up at my door with a casserole and asked if I needed anything. Do you remember that? You didn't know I'd just been diagnosed with diabetes. You didn't know Margaret and I had been arguing about whether I needed to go into assisted living. You just showed up because you'd heard I wasn't feeling well. That's when I really saw you, maybe for the first time since you were a little girl. I saw your father in you, his kindness, his lack of pretension, his ability to value people for who they are rather than what they have. Over these last 5 years, you visited me every week. You never asked for money. You never hinted that you expected anything from me. You just showed up, helped with whatever I needed, listened to my boring stories, laughed at my terrible jokes. Do you know how many times Trevor visited in those 5 years? 4. Always on major holidays, always with Margaret present, always making it clear he was fulfilling an obligation. Diane came 6 times, usually to discuss their inheritance plans, right in front of me like I was already dead. Brandon came twice, both times to ask for loans he had no intention of repaying. So yes, Hazel, I'm leaving everything to you. Not because I want to punish my children, though they probably deserve it. I'm leaving it to you because you're the only person in this family who understands that wealth is a responsibility, not a right. That money should be used to help people, to build things, to make the world slightly better than you found it. I know this will cause problems. Your family will contest this will, I'm sure. Robert has instructions and resources to fight them. They'll say terrible things about you. They'll claim you manipulated me, that I wasn't in my right mind. Don't let them break you. Use this money wisely. Use it to build the life your father would have wanted for you. Help your mother. Go back to school if you want. Start that animal shelter you used to talk about. Do something meaningful. And Hazel, don't feel guilty. You earned this by being a good person when no one was watching, when there was no reward in sight. That's more than most people ever do. I love you, sweetheart. I'm proud of the woman you've become. Your father would be proud too, Grandpa Edmund. I couldn't see the page anymore through my tears. The letter trembled in my hands as 5 years of Sunday afternoons flooded back, watching Westerns on his old TV, helping him sort his medications, listening to stories about Pittsburgh in the 1940s, teaching him how to text message so he could send me terrible jokes throughout the week. I'd done all of it because I loved him. Because after Dad died, Grandpa Edmund was the only connection I had left to my father's family. The only one who'd chosen me when everyone else had walked away. He changed the will 6 months ago? I asked, wiping my eyes. Hutchinson nodded. He came in personally, very determined. He'd been thinking about it for over a year, he told me. The final decision came after your cousin Brandon visited him and spent 2 hours complaining about his investment losses and hinting that Edmund should bail him out. Again. They're going to fight this, I said. Trevor, Diane, Brandon. They'll claim he wasn't competent, that I influenced him somehow. They already have, Hutchinson said calmly. I received a call from Trevor's attorney at 7:30 this morning before you even arrived. They're claiming undue influence and diminished capacity. They're demanding the will be invalidated. My stomach dropped. Can they do that? They can try. Hutchinson's smile was thin and sharp. But Edmund anticipated this. He had himself evaluated by 2 independent psychiatrists 3 months ago, specifically to establish his mental competency. Both certified he was of sound mind. He also kept detailed journals documenting his decision-making process, his observations of family dynamics, his reasoning for the changes, and I have security camera footage of every meeting we had. You can clearly see him articulating his wishes without any coaching or pressure. He pulled out yet another document. This is a letter Edmund wrote to his children, to be delivered after the will was read. It explains his decision in his own words. I'm legally required to provide copies to Trevor and Diane. They're not going to like what it says. When will they find out? I asked. About the inheritance, I mean. The formal reading of the will is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. here in this conference room. Your grandmother, Trevor, Diane, and Brandon will all be present. I'm required to invite you as well as the primary beneficiary. I imagined walking into that room, facing Trevor and Diane and Brandon and telling them I'd inherited everything they'd assumed was theirs. After they'd physically thrown me out of the funeral, after years of treating me like I didn't exist. I'll be there, I said quietly. Hutchinson studied me for a moment. Ms. Jones, I want to be clear about something. Your family is wealthy and well-connected. This fight could get ugly. They have resources to make your life very difficult. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my father, who'd chosen happiness over status and never regretted it. I thought about Grandpa Edmund, alone in his house for 5 years while his children were too busy for him. I thought about being carried out of that funeral home like garbage while people watched and did nothing. Yes, I said, I'm prepared. Tomorrow afternoon, the Price family would learn that everything they'd taken for granted had just been given to the person they'd spent years treating as worthless. And I would be there to watch their faces when they realized their cruelty had finally cost them everything. I arrived at Hutchinson and Lear 15 minutes early, my stomach churning with anticipation and dread. I'd barely eaten in 2 days. Sleep had been impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Brandon's face, Trevor's contempt, Diane's cold dismissal. The conference room was different this time, larger, with a massive table that could seat 12. Hutchinson was already there, arranging documents in neat stacks. He looked up when I entered. Ms. Jones. Good, you're early. I want to review something before the others arrive. He gestured to a chair at the far end of the table. Your grandfather requested that you sit at the head of the table during this reading. Symbolically, it represents your position as primary beneficiary and future head of the family estate. That's going to make them even angrier, I said. That's precisely why Edmund requested it. Hutchinson's expression was neutral, professional, but I caught a glint of something in his eyes. He'd clearly dealt with families like mine before. Your grandfather understood psychological warfare quite well. He practiced law for 40 years. At exactly 1:55 p.m., the receptionist Paula escorted my family into the conference room. Trevor entered first, his suit probably worth more than my monthly rent. His eyes locked onto me immediately, narrowing with confusion and anger. What is she doing here? Ms. Jones is a beneficiary under Edmund Price's will, Hutchinson said smoothly. She has every right to be present. Diane followed, her designer handbag clutched like a weapon. She looked thinner than she had at the funeral, her face pinched with stress. Robert, this is inappropriate. After her behavior at the funeral. Her behavior? I couldn't help myself. I was thrown out, literally carried out by Brandon while you all watched. Brandon smirked as he took a seat 3 chairs down from me. You were trespassing. Grandmother Margaret was the last to enter, moving slowly with her cane. At 79, she'd maintained the rigid posture of old money, but I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she lowered herself into a chair. She still hadn't looked at me directly. Now that everyone's here, Hutchinson began, let's proceed with the reading of Edmund Price's last will and testament, executed on April 14th of this year, and properly witnessed in accordance with Maryland state law. April, Trevor interrupted. That was only 6 months ago. Dad's health was failing by then. His judgment was clearly compromised. Mr. Price, Hutchinson said with steel in his voice, I will not tolerate interruptions during this reading. If you continue, I will have you removed and deliver your copy of the will by courier. Am I understood? Trevor's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Hutchinson began reading the legal preambles, the declarations of sound mind, the revocations of previous wills. I watched my family's faces as he spoke. Trevor kept glancing at his phone under the table. Diane stared straight ahead, her lips pressed into a thin line. Brandon looked bored, like this was a formality before he could access his inheritance. Then Hutchinson reached the distribution of assets section. To my beloved wife, Margaret Ann Price, I leave our marital home at 42 Stratford Road in Roland Park to remain her residence for the remainder of her life, with all associated costs and maintenance to be paid from the estate. Additionally, she shall receive a monthly allowance of $8,000 for living expenses. Margaret's face remained impassive, but her fingers tightened on her cane. To my son, Trevor Michael Price, and my daughter, Diane Marie Price Sullivan, I leave the following. Hutchinson paused, and I saw him glance up at Trevor and Diane. Nothing. They are specifically and intentionally excluded from inheriting any portion of my estate. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Trevor exploded. That's impossible! Dad wouldn't— This is fraud! She did this! He jabbed a finger at me. She manipulated him, poisoned him against his own children. Mr. Price, sit down, Hutchinson commanded. I'm not finished. I don't need to hear any more of this fabricated. Sit down. Hutchinson's voice could have cut glass. Or I will call security and have you forcibly removed, just as you had Ms. Jones removed from her grandfather's funeral. Trevor slowly sank back into his chair, his face purple with rage. Hutchinson continued. To my grandson, Brandon Michael Price, I leave nothing. He has repeatedly demonstrated that he views family relationships as financial transactions, and I will not reward that behavior. Brandon's smirk vanished. Wait, what? Grandpa, you can't— He's dead. He can't hear you, you idiot. Mr. Brandon Price, one more outburst and you'll be escorted out. Diane had gone completely white. Robert, there must be some mistake. Edmund always said the estate would be divided among the family. This can't be his actual will. This is indeed his actual will, properly executed and witnessed. And now we come to the primary beneficiary. Hutchinson looked directly at me. To my granddaughter, Hazel Marie Jones, daughter of my late son, Richard James Price, I leave the entirety of my remaining estate. This includes all real estate properties, excluding the marital home, all investment portfolios, all business interests, all liquid assets, and all personal property. The current estimated value of this bequest is $6,300,000. Trevor shot to his feet so fast his chair toppled backward. This is insane! He was obviously not in his right mind. We'll contest this immediately. Edmund anticipated that response, Hutchinson said calmly. He pulled out a sealed envelope. This letter is addressed to Trevor, Diane, and Brandon collectively. He instructed me to read it aloud in the presence of all beneficiaries. I don't want to hear his excuses, Diane said, but her voice cracked. Hutchinson ignored her and began reading. Trevor, Diane, and Brandon, if you're hearing this letter, you now know that I've left my estate to Hazel. I imagine you're angry, probably screaming about unfairness, about being betrayed, about contesting the will. Let me address those concerns. First, I was of completely sound mind when I made this decision. I've attached psychiatric evaluations to prove it. You can spend your money fighting this in court if you wish, but you'll lose. Second, this isn't about punishment, though you've earned it. This is about values. I spent 60 years building wealth, and I'll be damned if I leave it to people who measure human worth in dollar signs. Trevor, you treated your brother Richard like garbage because he chose integrity over income. You sneered at his wife Sarah because she didn't come from money. When Richard died, you convinced your mother to cut Hazel and Sarah off completely. You told me they were opportunists. The truth is, you were afraid they might need help, and helping them might cost you part of your inheritance. Diane, you were no better. You looked down on your own brother. You refused to attend Hazel's high school graduation because you were embarrassed to be associated with that side of the family. Those are your words, by the way. Richard told me about that conversation. It broke his heart. Brandon, you've asked me for money 17 times in the last 3 years. Not loans. You never paid back a single loan I gave you, just money, because you believed being my grandson entitled you to unlimited financing for your failed business ventures and gambling debts. In 5 years, Hazel visited me 63 times. I kept count. She never asked for anything. She just showed up, helped with whatever I needed, and treated me like a person instead of a bank account. So no, this isn't unfair. This is exactly fair. Hazel earned this inheritance through kindness when no one was watching. You 3 lost it through cruelty when you thought no one would care. Do not contact Hazel with demands or threats. Do not harass her. Mr. Hutchinson has instructions to pursue legal action if you attempt to intimidate or manipulate her in any way. You're my children, and I loved you despite everything. But love doesn't mean rewarding bad behavior. Maybe this will teach you something about the real value of family. Edmund Price. The conference room was silent except for Diane's quiet crying. She'd covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Margaret stared at the table, her expression unreadable. Trevor's face had gone from purple to pale. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and dangerous. You think you've won something, Hazel? You think taking our father's money makes you part of this family? I never wanted to be part of your family, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. I wanted to be part of Grandpa Edmund's life. That's all I ever wanted. We will fight this, Trevor said. We'll drag you through every court in Maryland. We'll expose every conversation you ever had with him, every visit, every phone call. We'll prove you manipulated a dying old man. Do your worst, I replied. Grandpa Edmund left me enough resources to fight you. And unlike you, I actually have the truth on my side. Brandon stood up abruptly. This is bullshit. Complete bullshit. You're a nobody, Hazel. A vet tech living in a studio apartment. You don't deserve this money. You don't even know what to do with it. Maybe not, I admitted. But I know what not to do with it. I won't use it to make people feel small. I won't use it to measure someone's worth. And I won't forget where I came from or who helped me get here. Diane looked up, mascara running down her cheeks. Edmund was my father. I loved him. Did you? The question came from Margaret. We all turned to stare at her. It was the first time she'd spoken since entering the room. Did you love him, Diane? Or did you love what he represented? Because I don't remember you visiting him once during his last hospitalization. Hazel was there every day. Mother, Diane started. Don't. Margaret's voice was sharp. Edmund showed me his will months ago. He asked if I agreed with his decision. I told him I did. You 3 stopped seeing your father as a person years ago. You saw him as an inheritance waiting to happen. Well, congratulations. It happened, just not the way you expected. She stood up slowly, leaning heavily on her cane. Hazel, I'd like to speak with you privately sometime this week. Come to the house for tea on Thursday. I nodded, too shocked to speak. Margaret walked out without looking at her children. After a moment, Diane followed, still crying. Brandon stormed out, slamming the conference room door hard enough to rattle the windows. Trevor remained seated, staring at me with cold calculation. This isn't over, Hazel. Not by a long shot. I know, I said quietly. He left, and suddenly it was just Hutchinson and me in the enormous conference room, surrounded by documents that had just torn my family apart. That went better than expected, Hutchinson said dryly. I started laughing, slightly hysterically. Better? No one threw anything, and security didn't need to intervene. In my experience, that qualifies as better. He began gathering the documents. Ms. Jones, I need you to understand something. This is just the beginning. They will come after you legally, socially, maybe even through the media. Are you still certain you want to fight? I thought about my father, who died without seeing his family make peace. I thought about Grandpa Edmund writing that letter, knowing exactly what chaos it would cause, but doing it anyway because he believed in something more important than family harmony. I'm certain, I said. Let them come. Outside the windows, Baltimore stretched out under gray November clouds. Somewhere in that city, Trevor was already calling his lawyers. Diane was probably telling everyone she knew about her ungrateful niece, who'd stolen the family fortune. Brandon was likely drinking away his shock and rage. But I had something they'd never understood. I had the truth, and I had the memory of an old man who'd chosen kindness over blood, who'd seen value in the grandchild his children had thrown away. That was worth more than $6 million. That was worth fighting for. The first attack came within 48 hours. I was at work at Riverside Veterinary Clinic on Wednesday morning, helping Dr. Patel with a difficult canine dental procedure, when my phone started buzzing incessantly in my locker. By the time I checked it during my lunch break, I had 17 missed calls, 23 text messages, and 6 voicemails. The texts were from numbers didn't recognize. Most said variations of the same thing. You should be ashamed. Elder abuser. Gold digger. Give them back their money. The voicemails were worse. One woman, her voice dripping with disgust, informed me that she was a member of Margaret's book club and that everyone in their circle knew what I'd done. A man who identified himself as Trevor's golf partner called me a manipulative opportunist who'd preyed on a vulnerable old man. Another voice, younger, said I'd better watch my back because people like me didn't get away with stealing from prominent families. I sat in the break room, staring at my phone, my sandwich untouched. Dr. Patel found me there 20 minutes later. Hazel, you okay? You look pale. I showed her the messages. Her expression darkened as she scrolled through them. This is harassment. You need to call the police. It's my family, I said numbly. Well, people they've told their version to. I don't care who it is. This is intimidation. She handed back my phone. Document everything. Screenshot every message, save every voicemail, and seriously consider changing your number. But changing my number felt like running away, and I'd spent 2 days convincing myself I was ready to fight. Still, the messages continued throughout the afternoon. By the time I left work at 6 p.m., the count had risen to 31 texts and 11 voicemails. That night, I found out Trevor had gone to the media. The local news segment was titled Family Feud Over Millionaire's Estate. They'd used an old photo of Grandpa Edmund from some charity event, looking distinguished and wealthy. Then they showed a recent picture of me. I had no idea where they'd gotten it, looking tired and disheveled outside my apartment building. The reporter's voice was carefully neutral, but the implications were clear. 26-year-old Hazel Jones, a veterinary technician, inherited the entire estate of prominent Baltimore attorney Edmund Price, cutting out his 2 children and other family members. Price's son, Trevor Price, claims his father was not of sound mind and alleges possible elder abuse and manipulation. They cut to an interview with Trevor, filmed outside Price and Associates. He looked devastated, the perfect picture of a grieving son. My father was 83 years old, suffering from diabetes and heart disease. In his final years, when he was most vulnerable, Ms. Jones isolated him from his family and convinced him to disinherit his own children. We're pursuing every legal avenue to correct this injustice. I turned off the TV, my hands shaking. He'd made me sound like a predator, a con artist who'd targeted a sick old man for his money. My phone rang. Hutchinson. I saw the news segment, he said without preamble. Don't respond. Don't talk to reporters. Don't make statements. Don't even acknowledge it exists. He's destroying my reputation, I said. Everyone's going to think I'm exactly what he's saying I am. Let him talk. We have evidence, documented visits, Edmund's psychiatric evaluations, his own letters explaining his reasoning. Trevor's playing to public opinion because he knows he'll lose in court. The more desperate his public campaign, the weaker his legal position. That doesn't help me when people are calling me an elder abuser. I know this is difficult, Hutchinson said, his tone gentler. But engaging now will only make it worse. Stay quiet, document the harassment, and let me handle the legal response. I'm filing a motion tomorrow to have the will probated immediately, and I'm also filing for a restraining order against Trevor, Diane, and Brandon if the harassment continues. After we hung up, I sat in my tiny apartment and tried not to cry. Through the thin walls, I could hear my neighbors' television, their laughter at some comedy show. Normal life continuing while mine fell apart. Thursday afternoon, I drove to Roland Park for tea with grandmother Margaret. The house where Grandpa Edmund had lived for 35 years was a massive brick colonial with white columns and a manicured lawn. I'd been there dozens of times over the past 5 years, but walking up the front steps felt different now, heavier. Margaret answered the door herself, waving away the housekeeper. Hazel, come in. The formal living room was exactly as I remembered. Antique furniture, expensive rugs, family photos covering every surface. I noticed that the photos of me and my father had been removed. In their place were pictures of Trevor's family, Diane's children, Brandon at his college graduation. Margaret followed my gaze. I took those down years ago, after Richard died and after we made our choices. She settled into a high-backed chair and gestured for me to sit across from her. I put them back up this morning. They're in the study now, where they should have been all along. I didn't know what to say to that. I suppose you're wondering why I asked you here, Margaret continued. I want you to understand something about the family you've just inherited a fortune from. We're not good people, Hazel. Oh, we're respectable. We have money and connections and social standing. But we're not kind. We're not generous. And we're certainly not forgiving. I've noticed, I said quietly. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Yes, I imagine you have. Edmund and I built this life together, but somewhere along the way, we lost sight of what mattered. We raised our children to value success over character. By the time we realized what we'd done, it was too late. Trevor and Diane were already the people you see today. Why didn't you fight for me? The question came out before I could stop it. When Dad died, when they wanted to cut us off, why didn't you say no? Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Because I was a coward. Because it was easier to go along with Trevor and Diane than to stand up to them. Because I told myself that you and your mother would be fine, that you didn't need us. She met my eyes. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I hadn't expected an apology, didn't know how to handle one. Edmund saw it more clearly than I did, she continued. He watched you grow up, watched you stay kind despite everything this family put you through. When your father died, Edmund wanted to help you financially, but Trevor and Diane convinced him it would enable dependency. So Edmund waited, watched, and when you showed up at his door 5 years ago with a casserole, he finally saw a way to make things right. She poured tea from an ornate silver pot, her hands remarkably steady. They're going to make your life hell, Hazel. Trevor's already hired Wallace Patterson. He's a vicious attorney who specializes in estate litigation. They'll subpoena your phone records, your financial history, every conversation you ever had with Edmund. They'll try to paint you as a calculating manipulator who spent 5 years grooming an elderly man for his money. I know, I said. Hutchinson warned me. Good, because it's going to get worse before it gets better. Margaret handed me a delicate china cup. Trevor's freezing me out now, too. Diane called yesterday and said I was betraying the family by supporting Edmund's decision. Brandon sent me a text message that I won't repeat, but it involved several creative insults regarding my intelligence and character. I'm sorry, I said. I never wanted to cause problems between you and your children. You didn't cause anything. Edmund caused it. Intentionally. She smiled. A real smile this time. He was angry at them for years, but didn't know how to address it. Then you came into his life and gave him both a reason and a method. This will was his final verdict on the family he created. We drank tea in silence for a moment. The house was eerily quiet. No staff bustling around. No family members stopping by. Just 2 women in a massive house built on money that had destroyed more than it had created. I can't give you back what Trevor and Diane lost, Margaret said finally. That's not my decision to make. But I can tell you that Edmund made the right choice. You'll do something meaningful with that money. They would have just used it to maintain their illusions of superiority. She stood up, signaling the visit was ending. One more thing. Edmund left some boxes for you in the attic. Personal items he wanted you to have, his journals, some of Richard's belongings that we kept, photos from when your father was young. Come by next week and I'll have them ready. At the door, Margaret touched my arm briefly. Don't let them break you, Hazel. You're stronger than you think, and you have something they'll never understand. You know who you are without money. They never learned that. Friday morning, Trevor's attorney filed a formal contest of the will. The document was 47 pages long and accused me of undue influence over a vulnerable elderly person, isolation of the deceased from his natural heirs, manipulation through emotional exploitation, possible financial abuse and fraud, taking advantage of Edmund Price's diminished mental capacity. Hutchinson had warned me it was coming, but seeing it in legal language, in a formal court document, made my stomach turn. Every kind thing I'd done for my grandfather, every Sunday visit, every grocery run, every time I'd helped him remember his medications, was being twisted into evidence of a calculated scheme. They're grasping at straws, Hutchinson told me over the phone. The psychiatric evaluations alone will demolish most of these claims. And we have security footage of Edmund in my office, completely lucid, explaining his reasoning. But we need to be prepared for depositions. They'll want to question you under oath. When? Probably within the next month. Wallace Patterson moves fast. In the meantime, continue documenting any harassment. And Hazel, prepare yourself for them to dig into every aspect of your life. They'll look at your finances, your relationships, your employment history. They'll try to find anything they can use against you. That evening, my mother called from Charleston. She'd seen the news coverage. Hazel, baby, what's happening? The news is saying terrible things about you and Grandpa Edmund. I explained everything. The funeral, the inheritance, the family's reaction. My mother was silent for a long time after I finished. Your father would be so proud of you, she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. Standing up to them like this, he never could. I'm not sure I'm standing up to them, I admitted. Mostly I'm just trying not to drown. That's standing up, sweetheart. Staying afloat when someone's trying to push you under. That's how you fight, she paused. Do you need me to come up there? I can take time off work. No, Mom, I'm okay. I have a good lawyer and Hutchinson says we'll win. That's not what I asked. I didn't ask if you'd win. I asked if you need your mother. I realized I was crying. Maybe, yeah. If you could come for a few days, that would help. I'll drive up tomorrow. And Hazel? Don't let them make you ashamed of being kind to your grandfather. That's exactly what they want. To turn something good into something ugly. Don't give them that power. Saturday morning brought a new development. I woke up to find my apartment building surrounded by photographers. Someone, probably Trevor or his PR team, had leaked my address. I called in sick to work, unable to face running the gauntlet of cameras. The reporters shouted questions as I peeked through my curtains. Did you manipulate Edmund Price? How does it feel to steal from your own family? Will you give back the money? Hutchinson sent a security consultant to my apartment that afternoon, a no-nonsense woman named Rita Garcia, who assessed my situation with professional efficiency. You need to move, she said bluntly. This address is compromised. They'll camp out here for weeks, making your life miserable. I can arrange secure temporary housing while the legal case proceeds. I can't afford to move, I said. Not yet. The estate is still in probate, and I'm living on my vet tech salary. Mr. Hutchinson authorized me to advance funds for security purposes. It's an expense the estate will cover. So I packed a bag and moved to a furnished apartment in a secure building in Federal Hill, registered under a name that wasn't mine. Rita installed additional security measures and gave me strict instructions about varying my routines, checking for followers, and screening all calls. Your family has money and connections, she warned. That makes them dangerous. They can't physically harm you without consequences, but they can make you feel unsafe. Don't let them. My mother arrived Sunday morning, letting herself into my new apartment with the spare key I'd arranged for her. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. Oh, baby girl, what have they done to you? Everything poured out. The messages, the news coverage, the 47-page document calling me a manipulative abuser, the photographers outside my old apartment. My mother held me while I cried, stroking my hair like she'd done when I was little. Listen to me, she said when I'd finally calmed down. Your father's family destroyed him slowly. Every family dinner where they made little comments about his work, every time they suggested he wasn't living up to his potential, every sneer at our house or our car or our choices. It wore him down like water on stone. She pulled back to look at me. But you're not your father. You've got his kindness, but you've also got my stubbornness. And you've got something he never had. Proof that you were right. Edmund saw it. He saw what you were and what they were, and he chose you. Don't let them take that away. Monday morning, Hutchinson called with unexpected news. Margaret Price has agreed to testify on your behalf. She's prepared to state under oath that Edmund was completely lucid, that he discussed his decision with her in detail, and that she supported his choice to leave the estate to you. She's willing to testify against her own children. Apparently so. She told me, and I quote, "It's time someone in this family told the truth, regardless of the consequences." She's also providing us with emails and text messages from Trevor and Diane that demonstrate their neglect of Edmund in his final years. This changed everything. A widow testifying that her late husband's wishes should be honored, providing evidence of her children's behavior. That was devastating to Trevor's case. How are they reacting? I asked. According to Margaret, not well. Trevor showed up at her house this morning and they had a significant altercation. She's changed her locks and informed him he's no longer welcome in her home without an invitation. The image of Margaret, elegant, refined, 79-year-old Margaret, standing up to her son and changing her locks, felt almost surreal, but also right. Maybe it was never too late to choose the right side. There's more, Hutchinson continued. I've been contacted by 3 other members of Edmund's social circle, fellow attorneys and friends, who want to provide character testimony about Edmund's mental state and his relationship with you. They all observed him discussing his decision and believe he was completely rational. For the first time in a week, I felt something other than dread. Hope, maybe, or at least the possibility that this fight wasn't quite as one-sided as it had seemed. What happens now? I asked. Now we prepare. Depositions start in 3 weeks. The probate hearing is scheduled for January, and in the meantime, we let them exhaust themselves with public relations campaigns while we build an unassailable case based on evidence and facts. And if they don't give up, then we go to trial and we win. Hazel, I've been practicing estate law for 22 years. I've never had a case with more clear-cut documentation of the deceased's wishes. Edmund did everything right: evaluations, documentation, witnesses, detailed explanations. He built you a fortress. All you have to do is stand inside it and refuse to surrender. That night, my mother and I ordered Chinese food and watched old movies on my laptop. Normal things, small things, reminders that life existed outside this legal nightmare. As I fell asleep on the couch, exhausted, but no longer alone, I thought about Grandpa Edmund building me a fortress, about Margaret changing her locks, about my mother driving 8 hours to hold me while I cried. Trevor thought he was fighting for money, but he'd never understood what he was really up against. People who'd finally decided that truth and decency mattered more than family harmony, more than social standing, more than maintaining the comfortable lives they'd all been living. The siege had begun, but I wasn't defending alone anymore. The conference room at Wallace Patterson's law firm was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Baltimore Harbor, leather chairs that probably cost more than my car, and a table so polished I could see my reflection in it. This was where Trevor's legal team would try to dismantle me piece by piece under oath. December had arrived with brutal cold, and I'd spent 3 weeks preparing for this moment. Hutchinson had drilled me on every possible question, every angle Patterson might use to make me look manipulative or calculating. My mother had returned to Charleston after 2 weeks, but she called every night to remind me I was stronger than I felt. Wallace Patterson entered the room like he owned it, which he probably did. Mid-50s, silver hair, a suit that screamed expensive confidence. Behind him came Trevor, Diane, and Brandon, all dressed like they were attending a funeral. Their funeral, Hutchinson had joked that morning, because once this deposition was over, their case would be dead. Ms. Jones, Patterson's smile didn't reach his eyes. Thank you for being here today. This is a simple fact-finding process. Nothing to be nervous about. She has counsel present, Hutchinson interjected smoothly, and she's well aware of what a deposition entails. The court reporter, a woman in her 30s who introduced herself as Lin Chen, set up her equipment. A videographer did the same. Everything I said for the next 4 hours would be recorded, transcribed, and potentially used against me in court. Patterson began with softball questions: my name, age, address, employment. Then he moved into more dangerous territory. Ms. Jones, When did you first contact Edmund Price after your father's death? I didn't contact him immediately, I answered carefully. My family had cut off contact after my father died. I didn't reach out to my grandfather until 5 years ago. So you waited 3 years after your father's death to contact Edmund Price. Why the delay? I'd expected this question. I respected my family's wishes. They made it clear I wasn't welcome, so I stayed away. Until you decided you wanted something from Edmund Price? Objection, Hutchinson said calmly, argumentative and assuming facts not in evidence. Patterson smiled. Let me rephrase. What prompted you to contact Edmund Price after 3 years of no communication? I didn't contact him. I ran into him at the grocery store. He was struggling with his bags, and I helped him load them into his car. We talked for a few minutes, and he invited me to visit. How convenient. Patterson's tone dripped skepticism. You just happened to run into one of Baltimore's wealthiest attorneys at a grocery store. It was the Giant on York Road, near his house. He shopped there every Saturday morning. I'd just moved to an apartment nearby. I kept my voice steady. I didn't know he'd be there. I didn't plan it. But you did accept his invitation to visit. Yes, he was my grandfather. I missed him. Patterson pulled out a thick folder. Let's talk about those visits. According to phone records we've subpoenaed, you called Edmund Price 63 times in the last 2 years of his life. That's quite frequent contact. He called me too, I pointed out. He'd phone when he needed help with something or just wanted to talk. How much money did Edmund Price give you during these visits? None. He never gave me money. Patterson's eyebrows rose theatrically. Not once? In 5 years of regular contact, Edmund Price never provided you with any financial assistance? That's correct. Did you ask him for money? No. Not even once? Come now, Ms. Jones. You're a veterinary technician making approximately $32,000 a year. You're telling me it never occurred to you to ask your wealthy grandfather for financial help? This was the trap. If I said yes, I looked like I'd been after money all along. If I said no, I looked like I was lying. It occurred to me, I admitted. There were times when money was tight, when my car broke down or my rent increased, but I never asked because that wasn't why I visited him. I visited because he was alone and I cared about him. How noble. Patterson's sarcasm was cutting. So you expect us to believe that you spent 5 years cultivating a relationship with Edmund Price, visiting him weekly, calling him regularly, helping him with various tasks, all without any expectation of financial reward? Yes. And it's just a happy coincidence that he left you $6 million. Objection, Hutchinson said. Counsel is testifying rather than asking questions. Patterson waved his hand dismissively. Ms. Jones, when did you first learn about the contents of Edmund Price's will? After he died, Mr. Hutchinson called me the day after the funeral. You had no prior knowledge that you were the primary beneficiary? None. Did Edmund Price ever discuss his will with you? No, he never mentioned it. Patterson looked skeptical. In 5 years of close contact, your grandfather never once mentioned his plans for his estate? Not to me. Did you ask? No. Why not? Weren't you curious? It wasn't my business. His estate was his decision. Patterson switched tactics abruptly. Let's discuss Edmund Price's health. You're aware he was diagnosed with diabetes in 2019? Yes. And congestive heart failure in 2021? Yes. Did you notice any cognitive decline during your visits? This was dangerous ground. No, he was sharp until the end. Really? No memory problems, no confusion, no difficulty following conversations? Sometimes he'd repeat stories he'd told me before, but that's normal for anyone. His mind was clear. Ms. Jones, we have medical records showing Edmund Price was prescribed donepezil in 2023. Are you aware that's a medication used to treat dementia? My heart sank. I hadn't known about that medication. I wasn't aware of all his prescriptions. So you admit you weren't fully informed about Edmund Price's medical condition? I knew he had some memory issues, but he was still competent. He could manage his own affairs, make his own decisions. Could he? Patterson pulled out another document. We have testimony from his primary care physician, Dr. Nathan Foster, stating that Edmund Price showed signs of mild cognitive impairment in his final year. Mild cognitive impairment isn't the same as being incompetent, Hutchinson interjected. Millions of people with MCI are perfectly capable of making legal decisions. Patterson ignored him. Ms. Jones, did you ever discourage Edmund Price from seeing his children? No. Did you tell him negative things about Trevor or Diane Price? No. Did you suggest that his children didn't care about him? I never had to suggest it. He could see it for himself. They barely visited. How many times did Trevor Price visit his father in the last 2 years? I don't know exactly. Maybe 4 or 5 times. And you know this because you were there frequently enough to monitor his other visitors? I saw the trap too late. I was there regularly, yes, but I wasn't monitoring anyone. Weren't you? Patterson leaned forward. Isn't it true that you positioned yourself as Edmund Price's primary caregiver specifically to isolate him from his family? No, that's not true. Then explain why, after you entered Edmund Price's life, his contact with his children decreased significantly. Because they were busy with their own lives, they always had been? Or because you made them feel unwelcome? I never made anyone feel unwelcome. I wasn't there when they visited. I scheduled my time around their availability. Patterson smiled like he'd scored a point. So you admit you knew when they were visiting? My grandfather would tell me when they were coming so we could coordinate schedules. How considerate! Patterson's sarcasm was thick. Let's talk about the will itself. You claim you had no knowledge of its contents before Edmund Price's death. That's correct. Then you were surprised to learn you'd inherited everything? Yes. Shocked. Shocked enough to immediately contact an attorney? Mr. Hutchinson contacted me. And you didn't think to decline the inheritance, to suggest that perhaps Edmund Price's own children should receive something? It wasn't my place to override his wishes. How convenient for you. The deposition continued for 3 more hours. Patterson attacked from every angle, suggesting I'd manipulated my grandfather, isolated him from family, taken advantage of his declining health, calculated every interaction to maximize my inheritance. He brought up my father's death, implying I'd used grief as a manipulation tactic. He questioned my motivations, my character, my finances, my relationship history. Through it all, I stuck to the truth. Yes, I'd visited regularly. No, I'd never asked for money. Yes, I'd loved my grandfather. No, I hadn't known about the inheritance. The same answers, over and over, until they started to sound mechanical, even to me. When Patterson finally concluded, I was exhausted. Hutchinson called for a break, and we retreated to a smaller conference room down the hall. You did well, he said, handing me a bottle of water. Patterson tried everything, but you stayed consistent. That's what matters. He made me sound like a con artist. He made himself sound desperate. Tomorrow we depose Trevor. You'll see how quickly this falls apart. Trevor's deposition was scheduled for the next morning in Hutchinson's office. This time, I was the observer, sitting beside my attorney while he methodically dismantled Trevor's case. Hutchinson started gently. Mr. Price, how many times did you visit your father in the last year of his life? Trevor shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure of the exact number. Approximately. Maybe 10 times? Hutchinson pulled out a visitor log from Edmund's assisted living facility during a brief stay after a fall. According to this official record, you visited 3 times in the last year. Would you like to revise your estimate? Trevor's jaw tightened. I may have been mistaken about the frequency. May have been. Hutchinson made a note. Let's discuss your relationship with your father. Would you characterize it as close? Very close. Did you call him regularly? When I could, I'm a busy man. Of course. How many times per month would you say you called? I don't keep track of every phone call. Hutchinson produced phone records. These records show you called your father's number 8 times in the last 2 years of his life. 8 calls in 24 months. Does that match your recollection? My father called me sometimes. According to these same records, he called you 4 times. You returned the call once. Is that what you consider a very close relationship? Trevor's face flushed red. I was busy building a business, supporting my family. I couldn't drop everything whenever my father wanted to chat. But Hazel Jones could. She had no life, no real responsibilities. Playing caretaker to an old man was probably the most interesting thing she had going on. Is that what you think motivated her? Boredom? That and greed. Let's talk about greed. Hutchinson's tone remained pleasant. How many times did you ask your father for financial assistance between 2019 and 2024? I never asked for financial assistance. I have my own money. Hutchinson pulled out bank records. These show 3 wire transfers from Edmund Price to your business account. $150,000 in March 2020, $75,000 in August 2021, and $200,000 in January 2023. A total of $425,000. Were these loans? Trevor hesitated. They were investments in my business. Did you pay them back? They were investments, not loans. My father was a partner. Do you have any documentation showing these were investment rather than gifts or loans? It was a verbal agreement. So no documentation. Did your father receive any return on these investments? The business is still growing. That's not what I asked. Did Edmund Price receive any dividends, profits, or returns from the $425,000 he gave you? Not yet. So he gave you nearly $500,000 and received nothing in return. Would you call that a sound investment? My father believed in supporting family businesses. Interesting. Did he give Hazel Jones any money to support her career or education? No, but thank you. That's all I needed to confirm. Hutchinson moved to Brandon's requests for money, to Diane's complaints about Edmund not being generous enough with gifts for her children, to documented instances of all 3 complaining about Edmund being stingy despite receiving substantial financial support over the years. Then Hutchinson dropped the bomb I hadn't known was coming. Mr. Price, do you recognize this document? He slid a printout across the table. Trevor glanced at it and went pale. Where did you get that? It's an email you sent to your sister, Diane Price Sullivan, dated November 3rd of last year, 11 days before your father's death. Could you read it aloud for the record? Trevor's hands shook slightly. I don't think that's relevant. The court will determine relevance. Please read it. Trevor cleared his throat. It says, the old man is getting worse. Dr. Foster says he's got maybe 6 months. We need to make sure he doesn't do anything crazy with the estate. Maybe it's time to discuss power of attorney before he loses capacity completely. Once we have control, we can undo any stupid decisions he might make about distribution. The silence in the room was deafening. You were planning to take control of your father's assets before he died, Hutchinson said quietly. To override his wishes about his own estate. Is that correct? I was concerned about his judgment. Or you were concerned he might leave money to someone other than you. Hutchinson didn't wait for an answer. Mr. Price, did your father know you were planning this? It was just a discussion. We never actually. Did your father know you were trying to take control of his estate against his wishes? No. Because if he had known, he might have done exactly what he did, ensure that you couldn't override his decisions after his death. Trevor said nothing. One final question, Mr. Price. In all your visits to your father over the last 5 years, did you ever tell him you loved him? Of course I did. When was the last time? Trevor opened his mouth, then closed it. I don't remember the specific date. Was it in the last year? I don't recall. The last 2 years? I don't keep track of every conversation. So you can't remember a single instance in the last few years of your father's life when you told him you loved him. But you expect this court to believe you had a close relationship and deserved his estate. That's not fair. Some people don't express emotions verbally. Ms. Jones expressed them through weekly visits, phone calls, helping with daily tasks, and being present when no one else was. Your father recognized the difference between words and actions. That's why she's sitting here as the heir to his estate, and you're sitting there trying to explain why you deserve money from a man you couldn't be bothered to visit. The deposition concluded shortly after. Trevor left the building without looking at anyone, his expensive suit somehow looking cheaper, his confident stride reduced to something closer to a retreat. That email destroyed his case, Hutchinson told me afterward. It shows consciousness of guilt. They knew Edmund was making decisions they didn't like, so they tried to take control before he could finalize them. Margaret's testimony about Edmund discovering their plan adds to it. No judge will invalidate a will when the contestants were actively trying to override the testator's wishes. So it's over, I asked, hardly daring to hope. Patterson will try a few more moves, but yes, essentially, it's over. We've demonstrated that Edmund was competent, that his decision was rational and well documented, and that the people contesting the will were motivated by greed, not concern for their father's well-being. 3 days later, Patterson contacted Hutchinson with a settlement offer. Trevor and Diane would drop the contest in exchange for $500,000 each. Absolutely not, I told Hutchinson immediately. Edmund specifically excluded them for a reason. I'm not paying them to honor his wishes. Good. That was a test to see if you'd cave. Patterson knows he's lost. The hearing was scheduled for January 15th, but on January 3rd, something unexpected happened. Brandon showed up at my apartment. Rita's security system alerted me before he reached my door. I watched him on my phone's video feed, my cousin looking nothing like the arrogant man who'd carried me out of the funeral. He looked tired, defeated. Against my better judgment, I opened the door with the chain still attached. What do you want, Brandon? To apologize, he said quietly. Can I come in? Please? I studied his face through the gap. No anger, no calculation, just exhaustion. Against every instinct, I unhooked the chain and let him in. What he told me over the next hour would change everything I thought I knew about my family. Brandon sat on my couch looking like he hadn't slept in days. His expensive jacket was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair uncombed. This wasn't the arrogant cousin who'd physically removed me from my grandfather's funeral. This was someone who'd been broken down to raw honesty. I'm not here because my dad sent me, he said immediately. He doesn't know I'm here. If he did, he'd probably disown me. Again. Again? I sat across from him, maintaining distance, still not entirely trusting this wasn't some kind of trap. Brandon laughed bitterly. Yeah. He disowned me 3 days ago when I told him I wasn't going to testify against you. Said I was betraying the family, that I was weak, that I was throwing away my inheritance. He met my eyes. Thing is, Hazel, I don't have an inheritance anymore. Grandpa made sure of that. And honestly, I deserved it. I waited. He clearly had more to say. I need to tell you something. Something I should have said at the funeral, something I should have admitted during my deposition. He took a shaky breath. Grandpa knew about the email, the one where Dad talked about getting power of attorney to override his wishes. Grandpa knew because I told him. My heart stopped. What? 6 months before he died, Dad brought me in on his plan. Said we needed to make sure Grandpa didn't waste the estate on charitable donations or, God forbid, leave anything to you. Dad wanted me to help convince Grandpa to sign over power of attorney, claiming it would make things easier for end-of-life care. Brandon's voice cracked. I was supposed to be the sympathetic grandson, the one who could manipulate him emotionally. Did you do it? I asked quietly. I tried. I went to see Grandpa that March, all prepared with my script about how we just wanted to help him. How legal paperwork would be easier if Dad could handle things. You know what Grandpa did? Brandon smiled sadly. He asked me if I thought he was stupid. I could almost hear Edmund's voice saying those exact words. He told me he knew exactly what my father was planning. Said he'd expected it, actually. Then he asked me a question that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. Brandon looked at his hands. He asked me, Brandon, when did you stop being a decent person? Not if I'd stopped. When? The apartment was silent except for the distant sound of traffic. I didn't have an answer, Brandon continued. I sat there in his living room, and I couldn't remember when I'd turned into someone who would help his father steal an old man's autonomy. I couldn't remember when money became more important than basic human decency. He wiped his eyes. Grandpa told me something that day. He said, I'm going to give you a choice, Brandon. You can walk out that door and go back to your father and tell him his plan won't work. Or you can stay and let me tell you about the kind of man your Uncle Richard was, and the kind of woman his daughter became. You stayed, I said softly. I stayed. And Grandpa spent 3 hours telling me stories about your dad, about how Richard used to defend kids who got bullied at school, even though it made him unpopular, about how he chose to be a carpenter because he wanted to build things with his hands, create something real and lasting, about how he met your mom and fell in love with someone who saw him for who he was, not what he had. Brandon's voice grew thick with emotion. Then he told me about you, about how you showed up 5 years ago and never asked for anything, about how you'd sit with him and listen to the same stories over and over without complaining, about how you reminded him that there was still kindness in this family, even if it came from the branch everyone had cut off. I felt tears sliding down my cheeks. After that day, I couldn't do it anymore. I told Dad the power of attorney thing wouldn't work, that Grandpa was too sharp. Dad was furious, but I couldn't. He broke off. The funeral was my last attempt at being the person Dad wanted me to be. When I carried you out, when I said those horrible things, I was trying to prove I was still on their side. But I wasn't. I haven't been since that conversation with Grandpa. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because you deserve to know the truth. And because he pulled out a folded envelope from his jacket. Grandpa gave me this that day. He said to give it to you after the will was read, but only if I felt like I'd learned something from all of this. I think I finally have. I took the envelope with trembling hands. My name was written on it in Edmund's handwriting. There's something else, Brandon said. My testimony during the deposition was all lies. Patterson coached me on what to say, how to make your visit sound suspicious, how to make Grandpa seem confused and vulnerable. None of it was true. Grandpa was sharp until the end, and your relationship with him was genuine. I'm prepared to submit an affidavit saying exactly that. Your father will never forgive you. I know. Brandon stood up. But maybe that's okay. Maybe I need to figure out who I am without his approval. Grandpa tried to teach me that. Took me 28 years and losing millions of dollars to finally listen. At the door, he turned back. I'm sorry, Hazel, for the funeral, for everything before that, for being part of a family that treated you like you were worthless. You deserved better. Your dad deserved better. After he left, I sat alone with the envelope for a long time before I could bring myself to open it. Dearest Hazel, if Brandon gave you this letter, it means he chose differently than I expected. I wasn't sure he would. The Price family has a way of pulling people back into patterns of cruelty and greed, even when they know better. But I had hope for Brandon. Underneath all the entitlement and arrogance his father cultivated, there was still a spark of the little boy who used to help his grandfather in the garden, who cried when his pet rabbit died, who wanted to be a teacher before Trevor convinced him it was a waste of potential. I'm telling you this because you need to understand something important. Not everyone who hurts you is beyond redemption. Some people are trapped in patterns created by others, patterns they don't know how to escape. If Brandon gave you this letter, consider forgiving him. Not because he deserves it, but because you deserve to let go of that anger. Carrying hatred for people who are taught to be cruel will only weigh you down. However, this forgiveness does not extend to Trevor and Diane. They are adults who made conscious choices over decades to value money over people. They cut off your mother when she needed help. They poisoned their own son against basic kindness. They tried to control my estate before I was even dead. Don't waste your energy trying to reconcile with them. Some relationships aren't worth saving. But Brandon, he still has time to become someone better. If he's reached out to you, if he's trying to make amends, give him a chance. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give is the opportunity for someone to prove they've changed. Love always. Grandpa Edmund. I read the letter 3 times, crying through each reading. Even in death, Edmund was teaching me lessons about humanity, about the difference between justice and vengeance, about when to forgive and when to walk away. The next morning, I called Hutchinson and told him about Brandon's visit. By that afternoon, Brandon had submitted a sworn affidavit recanting his deposition testimony and detailing Trevor's attempts to manipulate the legal process. It was devastating to the remaining case. Wallace Patterson called Hutchinson within hours. My clients wish to withdraw their contest, he said formally. No explanation, no negotiation, just surrender. The probate hearing on January 15th was barely a formality. Judge Catherine Reynolds reviewed the evidence, Edmund's psychiatric evaluations, his detailed letters, his journal entries documenting his decision-making process, Margaret's testimony, Brandon's affidavit, and the email showing Trevor's pre-death manipulation attempts. I've been on the bench for 19 years, Judge Reynolds said, and I've never seen a will with more thorough documentation of the testator's intent. Edmund Price knew exactly what he was doing, understood the consequences of his decisions, and took extraordinary measures to ensure his wishes would be honored. The contest is denied. The will is admitted to probate as written. Trevor and Diane sat in the back of the courtroom, their lawyers beside them, their faces carved from stone. They didn't look at me as they left. I wondered if they ever would again. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. But this time the narrative had changed. The local news wasn't asking if I'd manipulated my grandfather. They were reporting on the family members who'd tried to override a dying man's wishes, who'd been exposed as greedy and manipulative through their own emails and testimony. Ms. Jones, one reporter called out, what do you plan to do with the inheritance? I paused, something Edmund had written in his letter to me echoing in my mind. Do something meaningful. I'm going to honor my grandfather's legacy, I said. He believed wealth was a responsibility, not a prize. I intend to use these resources to help others the way he helped me, by seeing people for who they are, not what they have. 3 months later, I stood in front of a newly renovated building in East Baltimore. The sign read, "The Richard and Edmund Price Animal Sanctuary, a place of second chances." My father had loved animals. Growing up, our small house had always had at least one rescue dog, or cat, usually more. Dad used to say that animals didn't care. If you were rich or poor, successful or struggling, they just cared if you were kind. The sanctuary would focus on animals others had given up on. Older dogs, cats with medical issues, pets abandoned when their owners couldn't afford care anymore. We'd provide free veterinary services to low-income families, educational programs for kids interested in animal welfare, and a no-kill shelter that would give every animal the time they needed to find the right home. Dr. Patel had agreed to be our lead veterinarian. Rita Garcia, who'd provided security during the worst of the legal battle, had offered to manage operations. Turned out she'd worked in animal rescue before private security and had been looking for a way back. My mother came up from Charleston for the opening. She stood beside me, tears streaming down her face as we cut the ribbon. "Your dad would be so proud," she whispered. "So would Edmund." The sanctuary wasn't my only project. I'd established a scholarship fund at Maryland University for students from working-class families pursuing trades, carpentry, plumbing, electrical work, all the dignified professions my father had been shamed for choosing. The Richard Price Memorial Scholarship would cover tuition, tools, and living expenses for 10 students every year. I'd also donated substantially to the Baltimore Food Bank, the organization where my mother had relied on help after Dad died. And I'd set up a trust fund for veterinary emergency care, ensuring that families who loved their pets but couldn't afford unexpected medical bills wouldn't have to choose between treatment and bankruptcy. The remaining money, still several $1,000,000, sat in carefully managed investments. I'd moved to a modest townhouse in Mount Vernon, comfortable but not ostentatious. I still worked part-time at Riverside Veterinary Clinic because I loved the work, though I'd reduced my hours to focus on the sanctuary. Margaret visited regularly. She'd become the grandmother I'd never really had, attending sanctuary events, helping with fundraising, and slowly revealing stories about Edmund's early years that helped me understand the man who'd changed my life. He wasn't always wealthy, she told me one afternoon over tea at her house. When we married, he was a struggling young lawyer working 80-hour weeks to build his practice. I worked as a secretary to help pay the bills. We understood what it meant to be uncertain about money. What changed? I asked. Success changed things, not all at once, but gradually. The more money we made, the more we surrounded ourselves with people who had money. Trevor and Diane grew up in a different world than Edmund and I started in. They never knew what it was like to worry about making rent or affording groceries. We thought we were giving them advantages. Instead, we gave them blind spots. She set down her teacup carefully. Edmund saw that clearly at the end. That's why he chose you. You understood both worlds, the one where money was tight and the one where it wasn't. You could appreciate resources without worshiping them. 6 months after the probate hearing, I received an unexpected email. Brandon. Hazel. I know we haven't spoken since that day in your apartment. I wanted you to know I've made some changes. I left my father's company and started working at a nonprofit that builds affordable housing. The pay is terrible compared to what I'm used to, and Dad hasn't spoken to me since I quit. But I wake up every morning feeling like I'm doing something that matters. Grandpa would probably find that funny. Took losing millions to teach me what really matters. I'm not asking for forgiveness or trying to be part of your life. I just wanted you to know that the conversation we had and Grandpa's letter made a difference. Thank you for giving me a chance when I didn't deserve one. Brandon. I wrote back. Brandon. Grandpa would be proud of you. Come by the sanctuary sometime. We can always use volunteers who know how to build things. Turns out I'm not very good with power tools. Hazel. 1 year after Edmund's death, I stood at his grave in Greenmount Cemetery. The November wind was cold, the same as the day they'd thrown me out of his funeral, but everything else was different. I placed flowers on the gravestone, wildflowers, the kind that grew in patches throughout the city, resilient and beautiful despite growing in difficult places, like the animals we were saving, like the students getting second chances, like me. I did something meaningful, Grandpa, I said quietly. Just like you asked, the sanctuary opened last month. We've already found homes for 32 animals. The scholarship program awarded its first 10 students. Mom's doing well. She came to the opening and met Dr. Patel and Rita. She likes them. A car pulled up behind me. Margaret emerged, moving slowly with her cane. I hadn't expected her. I come here every Wednesday, she said, making her way to the grave. Seems right to visit the man who finally taught this family what loyalty actually means. We stood together in silence for a while. Two women connected by a man who'd seen value where others saw worthlessness. Trevor tried to contact me last week, Margaret said finally. Wanted to know if I'd consider changing my will to restore his inheritance. What did you tell him? I told him that Edmund and I discussed this possibility before he died. My will mirrors his. Everything goes to you, with a monthly allowance for me while I live. Trevor gets nothing. I stared at her, shocked. Margaret, you don't have to. I want to. Edmund was right about our children. We raised them wrong, and they never learned to correct themselves. But you, she squeezed my hand, you're the family we should have had. The daughter who understands that wealth means responsibility, that love means presence, that kindness is worth more than any bank balance. Behind us, a young family entered the cemetery. A father, mother, and two small children carrying flowers. The father was explaining something to his kids in a gentle voice. I thought about my own father, who'd never got to see me grow up completely, who'd died believing his family had failed him. But he hadn't failed. He'd raised a daughter who knew what really mattered. And somehow his father had recognized that and made sure Richard's values survived, even if Richard himself couldn't. Come on, Margaret said. Let's get some coffee. I want to hear about this new educational program you're planning. As we walked back to our cars, my phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Patel. Emergency surrender just came in. Pregnant mama dog and puppies need immediate care. Can you come to the sanctuary? I texted back. On my way. This was my life now. Not perfect, not without complications, but meaningful. Every day, I woke up and did work that mattered. I helped animals no one else wanted. I funded education for students who deserved opportunities. I honored my father's memory and my grandfather's faith in me. The $6 million wasn't really mine. It was a tool, a responsibility, a chance to prove that Edmund Price had been right about me all along. That kindness wasn't weakness, that being cast out by people who valued money over character wasn't rejection. It was liberation. As I drove to the sanctuary, I thought about how different my life had looked 1 year ago. I'd been the unwanted granddaughter, physically removed from a funeral, dismissed as worthless by people who measured value in bank balances. Now I was the keeper of Edmund's legacy. The person who'd transformed his wealth into something that would outlive us all. The woman who'd proven that the best revenge against cruelty wasn't cruelty in return. It was living well, giving generously, and showing the world what it looked like when someone used privilege to lift others up rather than look down on them. Trevor and Diane had wanted money. They'd fought for it, schemed for it, destroyed relationships over it, and they'd lost it all because they'd never understood what Edmund had tried to teach them their entire lives. Wealth without character is just expensive emptiness. I had both now. Not because I'd manipulated or schemed, but because I'd shown up when no one was watching. Because I'd loved an old man without expecting anything in return. Because I'd valued the relationship more than the inheritance. And in the end, that was exactly what Edmund had been waiting for someone to do. As I pulled into the sanctuary parking lot, I saw the pregnant mama dog being carried in by one of our volunteers. She was scared, thin, probably abandoned when someone realized how expensive puppies would be. But she was safe now. We'd take care of her, help her deliver healthy puppies, find homes for all of them with families who would treasure them. That's what second chances looked like. For animals, for Brandon, for me. Edmund had given me a second chance at family, at belonging, at understanding my worth. And now I spent every day giving others the same gift. That was what $6 million could do when it landed in hands that understood its real value. That was what love looked like when it chose truth over comfort, kindness over convenience, and justice over family harmony. That was Edmund Price's final lesson, and I would spend the rest of my life proving I'd learned it well. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.